The Priestess, Chapter 6 of Shardik by Richard Adams, read by Celeste Lawrence in September 2020. The Priestess. As Keldrek became quiet, and seemed to fall asleep where he lay, a light appeared within the opening in the rock wall. It grew brighter, and 2 young women came out, each carrying a burning torch. They were sturdy, rough-looking girls, barefooted, and dressed in coarse tunics, but no baron's wife could have matched the half of their ornaments. Their long earrings, which swung and clicked as they walked, were formed of separate pieces of carved bone, strung together in pendants. Their triple necklaces of alternate panapa and ziltate shone rose and tawny in the firelight. On their fingers were wooden rings, carved to resemble plating, and stained crimson. Each wore a broad belt of bronze plates, with a clasp fashioned like the head of a bear, and on the left hip an empty dagger sheath of green leather, whorled like a shell, in token of perpetual virginity. On their backs they carried wicker baskets filled with fragments of a resinous gum, and a black fuel, hard and fine as gravel. At each tripod they stopped, and, taking handfuls from each other's panniers, threw them into the bowls. The fuel fell with a faint ringing sound, lingering and overtoned, and the girls, as they worked, paid no more attention to the waiting men than if they had been tethered beasts. They had almost finished their task, and the terrace was bright with fresh light, when a 3rd young woman came pacing slowly from the darkness of the cave. She was dressed in a pleated, sheath-like robe of white cloth, finer than any woven in Ortelga, and her long black hair hung loose at her back. Her arms were bare, and her only ornament was a great collar of fine gold links, more than a span broad, which completely covered her shoulders like a vestment. As she appeared, the 2 girls slipped their baskets from their backs and took up places side by side upon the edge of the ashes. Belcotrazet raised his eyes to meet those of the young woman. He said nothing, however, and she returned his look with an impassive air of authority, as though every man had a face like his, and they were all one to her. After a few moments she jerked her head over her shoulder, and one of the girls, coming forward, led the servants away, disappearing into the darkness under the trees near the bridge. At the same moment the hunter stirred, and rose slowly to his feet. Ragged and dirty, he stood before the beautiful priestess with an air less of callowness than of simple unawareness either of his appearance or his surroundings. Like the tall woman on the beach, the priestess stared intently at Keldrek, as though weighing him in some balance of her mind. At length she nodded her head 2 or 3 times with a kind of grave, comprehending recognition, and turned once more towards the High Baron. "It is meant, then," she said, "that this man should be here. Who is he?" "One whom I have brought, Sayet," replied Belcotrazet briefly, as though to remind her that he too was a person of authority. The priestess frowned. Then she stepped close to the High Baron, put her hand upon his shoulder, and, assuming the air of a wondering and inquisitive child, drew his sword from the scabbard and examined it, the Baron making no attempt to stop her. "What is this?" she asked, moving it so that the light of the flames flashed along the blade. "My sword, Sayet," he answered with a touch of impatience. "Ah, your—" She paused, hesitating a moment, as though the word was new to her. "Sword. A pretty thing, this sword. So, and pressing hard, she drew the edge 3 or 4 times across her forearm. It made no cut, and left no mark whatever. "Sheldra," she called to the remaining girl, "the High Baron has brought us a sword." The girl approached, took the sword in both hands, and held it out horizontally at the height of her eyes, as though admiring the sharpness of the edge. "Ah, now I see," said the priestess lightly. Drawing the flat of the blade against her throat, and motioning the girl to hold firmly, she made a little jump, swung a few moments by her chin on the sharp edge, and then, dropping to the ground, turned back to Belcotrazet. "And this?" she asked, plucking the knife from his belt. This time he made no reply. Assuming a puzzled look, she drove the point into her left arm, twisted it, drew it out bloodless, shook her head, and handed it to the girl. "Well, well, toys." She stared coldly at him. "What is your name?" she asked. The Baron opened his mouth to speak, but after a moment the twisted lips closed askew, and he remained looking at her as though she had not yet spoken. "What is your name?" she said to Keldrak in the same tone. As though in a dream, the hunter found himself perceiving on two planes. A man may dream that he is doing something, flying perhaps, which even in the dream he knows that he cannot do. Yet he accepts and lives the illusion, and thus experiences as real the effects following from the discounted cause. In the same way, Keldrak heard and understood the priestess's words, and yet knew that they had no meaning. She might as well have asked him, "What is the sound of the moon?" Moreover, he knew that she knew this, and would be satisfied with silence for an answer. "Come," she said, after a pause, and turned on her heel. Walking before them, the grim, mutilated Baron and the bewildered hunter, she led them out of the circle of blue flaming bowls and through the opening in the rock.